Hello, Measure Masters. Welcome to another edition of the Measure Masters live training we do every month here. Now, you're probably watching this on the replay, and we have a few minutes more to go before we actually start the presentation. So look down in the description below where we gonna have all the different timestamps for you, so you'll be able to just click on them and start right where the presentation starts. So for now, I'm just gonna look up who is in the chat and who's joining us today and see if everything works. Let me see. Okay. Now, it was quite funny this morning. What happened to me? I tried to install this new distraction blocker thing, and it's like I have the software for a few years now, and it worked always quite well. Especially, I knew how to get around it, so it blocks my distractions from Facebook to YouTube and so on. And I have it only on a certain given time period. But yesterday I got an update to the software, so I was like, okay, let's install the update. And this morning, when I started to prepare for this thing, I opened up YouTube to start the live stream, and I've noticed that my distractions were also blocked, and I wasn't able to access YouTube. I was like, what is wrong? There's this little thing installed, and you can't turn it off. So I was Googling for half an hour trying to figure out how to turn off this distraction blocker. And I was like, okay, I should make this work. I finally made it work, but it's just a funny thing that you never think about when you install these kind of stuff. Anyways, let's have a look here. Michael is already online. Hey, Michael, good to see you. I'm gonna also take our live stream here and put that into our little Facebook group. So just a moment here. And mark this as an announcement. Okay, great. And Tanya is also here. Hey, Tanya, good to have you as well. We're gonna get started in a few minutes. So we are punctual actually and make everything work. What would interest me is obviously, can you guys hear me? Because if you can't hear me, that wouldn't be good. And everything is coming through clear. That would be my interest right now. Otherwise, I'm always happy to chat and see what you are up to. So let me know if you have anything new going on. It was interesting to hear from, who was that yesterday in the group? Who's at Super Week? Somebody's at Super Week. Yenya is at Super Week, and she got a scoop on custom templates that are gonna come to Google Tag Manager. So that I'm pretty excited about. And Julius also asked the question if there are and she even sent around a little Google testing. So you can sign up to be whitelisted. Thanks for that, Yenya. Otherwise, I'm also excited about one feature that came out. I watched a video on the next Chrome features that are gonna come out, and there will be a functionality in the DevTools that lets us copy a query selector option with JavaScript. That should make it super easy to actually build these kind of query selectors that we sometimes build in custom JavaScript variables. So that's something that's probably gonna come out. It's probably already out. There are different versions of Chrome. So if you are on the developer version, Carnary, it's actually called. I don't have that version on my computer. You could try it out and mess with it. That's actually the pretty interesting part of Chrome always developing further. They're actually bringing out a version every 6 weeks. So there's always new stuff coming out. Let's see if anybody joined us. Just say hello in the chat so we can see. You look fresh and awake. Yes, I'm awake. Fresh, I don't know. I have my coffee here. So I hope I will make it through our little presentation here. Cool. Michael started a new job at the marketing agency as a digital media analyst. So are you doing more of the performance marketing stuff, of looking at AdWords and so on? Or do they really do like the hardcore display advertising media stuff? That's something that I'm not too familiar with. I'm more on the performance marketing side. But congrats on the new job, first of all. So that's great to hear that people are making strides forward. All right, notifications should have gone out to everybody. I hope this is something that interests enough people. It's gotten quite cold here in Germany. I'm actually taking off to Mallorca in Spain for the weekend, just for the weekend. And there should be a little bit warmer. Unfortunately, not over 20 degrees, so still gonna need that sweater. But I'm looking forward to warmer days actually, because it has become quite cold here as well. So you're doing everything, Michael. That's great to hear. Okay, we are almost there. We're gonna talk today about the perfect Google Analytics setup. A little bit clickbaity title, I guess. A little bit, how you call this? Sensational. And I just wanted to make a presentation to pick up this topic, because over the years my thinking has actually changed. What is the perfect Google Analytics setup? And this is where I left off today, and I put together my thoughts into this, yeah, I wouldn't call it framework, but into these thoughts that I wanted to present. And that might challenge some of your assumptions that you have when you build a Google Analytics setup. So that's the background on that. Later on, we're obviously also going to answer the questions that will come up on the forum, but also on the forum that I have on the website. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or in the chat, and I'm be sure to answer them later on as well. How was India? Oh yeah, India was great. That was in November actually. So India was already 2 months ago. India was great. It's such a fascinating country. If you look at how many people are there are just massive people everywhere. It's very loud, it's very hectic, but at the same time, technology-wise, I was so amazed by how many people have a smartphone. I mean, nowadays smartphones get pretty cheap, so I expect everybody to have one, but everybody's on their phone. And then if you, as a tourist, if you have Uber, right, here in Germany, everybody's fighting Uber, like especially the taxi industry. They don't want to have it. So if you look at Uber, there is so efficient as a tourist. You don't have to haggle with a taxi driver. You don't have to go into explaining the route. He has everything on his phone. He gets paid the amount of money, and we don't get scammed, which is a big plus in India. So I was just amazed in terms of technology. You have everywhere. You have 4G. I was in the desert and had 4G, and you have data plans that are like huge compared to Germany. So that was my little India impressions. Let's get to our presentation today. We wanted to start sharp at 10 a.m. here in Germany. Whoops, this is here we go. I hope you can see me. Welcome everybody to this month's presentation of the Measure Master live training. Today I want to talk about the perfect Google Analytics setup. Thank you for joining us live. If you have any questions during the presentation, please leave them in the chat. I will go back later on and read through them. I can't do this while I do the presentation, but I'm gonna answer all your questions hopefully later on. If you have any questions and you're watching this in replay, then leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to jump in and answer them as well. Now, what we do on this live training, I have a presentation prepared. I have a little bit of a demo. This time I don't have a demo, I just have the presentation. And then we'll go into Q&A and answer your questions. So if you're watching this on a replay, next time you can be live here as well if you join us at the given right time. Today we're going to talk about the perfect Google Analytics setup. You probably are thinking, well, that's pretty sensational because there is nothing such a perfect Google Analytics setup. Nonetheless, I get asked by a lot of people, I just want to have the perfect Google Analytics setup. What is the template that you can give me? What I can just copy over to the next account and everything will be set up for me. How can I do this? And then you get into explaining, and that's where I want to explain my thoughts today. And especially I want to also go into how we will be able to get to our perfect Google Analytics setup. What does that actually mean and how can we get to it? So let's dive in. Whoops, this was the wrong button. So let's dive in. First of all, what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. Then I'm going to go through my framework that I come up with. It's not really a framework, it's just my thoughts on level 1, 2, and 3 on how you can go through your perfect Google Analytics setup. And then I'm going to summarize my takeaways or your takeaways hopefully as well in this little presentation. And we're going to go into Q&A. If you have a question during this call, put them into the chat. First of all, let's start with a little introduction. A long time ago, I was actually also just a freelancer. Maybe you are a freelancer at this point in time, or you were working with clients. And I had just come out of a performance marketing job, or I was a performance marketer before, did this for a few years and was really fascinated with Google Analytics, learned more about Google Analytics, and then I wanted to really figure out how can I make money with Google Analytics. And my thoughts were, well, Google Analytics is free and therefore it's hugely popular. Every website has it on their page. Google Analytics is powerful beyond comprehension for most of the people, but Google Analytics is also very complicated or hard to figure out or right to install, right? There are so many different moving pieces, which makes it very interesting to me. So I had the perfect market really here. How can I make my Google Analytics skills into money? And then I thought, oh, well, if it's really hard to complicated to install and figure out, why not come up with a product that is like the perfect Google Analytics setup, the setup that I can like sell like hotcakes over and over again, because most of the people have just Google Analytics installed and don't know how to do it. And this is the product that I envisioned at the beginning. What would a perfect Google Analytics setup look like? Well, a perfect Google Analytics setup in the perfect world, it will give us clean data, it will give us relevant data, and it would let us do analysis and in the end give us insights, right? That's what we all dream of. We just want to log in and say, wow, I didn't know this before and I'm going to change this based on this. This is my insight. Google Analytics is super valuable. And it can be that tool, but in a sense, we all know that Google Analytics has a huge feature list. And I sat down and said, okay, how would that product look like? I went through my list. I looked through all the different features, and you can actually look at our Google Analytics checklist, which we have inside of Measure Masters, where we have all the different features. And now I could install them, right? But the problem really here lies in every time I went through a feature, I said, well, is this really something that meets my goals? Can I get cleaner data through it? Can I get more relevant data through it, right? Can I let the person using Google Analytics do better analysis and get the insights? And I struggled really with with each of these points, because each of these points you had to make a decision. Do I install this? Is this worth installing? Will it get cleaner data? And if you look at a big feature, for example, e-commerce tracking, it's obviously not something that you would install for every website, as not every website is an e-commerce store. So the question really I was faced was, one size doesn't really fit all. Can I take a perfect Google Analytics setup and say that it's a setup that I can put onto every business, every website, every person that actually sits in front of this analytics implementation? And the obvious question is no. You can't have a perfect Google Analytics setup. You can only have a perfect Google Analytics setup for you, for the business, or for your client. So it is about customization. It is taking the abilities of Google Analytics and putting it onto the business itself. And then building out of that the perfect Google Analytics setup. So the perfect Google Analytics setup for you would give you the clean data, would give you relevant data for your business, for your client, and so on, and lets you do the analysis with ease and obviously make insights. So let's make Google Analytics into our tool, into our perfect tool for our analysis. Should we? Wait. There is a caveat, obviously, to everything. And that's what I realized later on, after I've done multiple implementations, after my best practice list, going through them and saying, okay, you should install this, you should install that. This would make sense for your business. And I built them the perfect Google Analytics implementation for their business. But it's not really just about the tool, is it? You could have the perfect tool if you don't have the right problem to solve, like here, or you don't have the right people on board, then it might be something that it is unusable, although you have the perfect tool. So the question that a lot of people forget when they try to come up with the perfect Google Analytics setup is, who's actually the guy sitting in front of the computer, looking at that data, analyzing that data? What is the business that you're working with? What is the client that you're working with? And this is something we actually need to think about. There are multiple factors that come into play when we build a analytics implementation. And one framework that helped me a lot is the Web Analytics Maturity Model by Stefan Hamel. And he came up with this a few years ago. He actually has a website where you can go through an assessment in order to see where you're at with it, which is at digitalanalyticsmaturity.org. And it's like this hexagon that helps you to evaluate where you're at. So you could build a circle inside, and the further you go outside of the circle, you would be able to evaluate and get more mature in your analytics practice. So the criteria that he looks at, and obviously there are more criteria or less criteria in the business that you are working with, are first of all, management. How much buy-in do we have from that side? The higher structure of the organization, is it built into their strategy, the digital analytics strategy? The objectives, do we have the right incentives to actually go forward, and what goals do we want to reach with our efforts in digital analytics? The scope, Do we install it on one website? Do we install it on multiple websites? Do we install it for our whole group, on our POS systems, on everything? How big is that strategy actually, the scope of it? The resources, money is one thing, but also the team, human resources. We have all of these things that we need to take into consideration when we come up with a good strategy for our digital analytics. Methodology, do we have the right knowledge and the right methodology to go through and make a successful project or successful strategy out of our digital analytics efforts? And then last is, maybe not last, but it's the thing that people always think the first about are the tools. And Google Analytics is also just a tool. Today we want to talk about this tool, but just consider everything around this. And if the tool is actually just one aspect, it's probably interconnected with the other ones. And we need to think about these interconnectedness. And a tool is also only as strong as how many people are sitting in front of it, how many people can use it, how people can put it into action. So there's a lot that goes into an informed digital analytics strategy, and that's what I came to realize as well when I started working with Google Analytics setups, right? The perfect Google Analytics setup. There are different regions, different levels of digital analytics setups, and it depends where you're at this maturity level. So maybe let's start here. Maybe let's build a basic Google Analytics setup that is perfect for this one digital analyst that sits in front of it, or somebody who just wants to do AdWords, right? Give him the data that is relevant to him and not go and build this whole ecosystem of what you could track and you get the greatest data in the world. It's really about what is the digital analytics data used for. So when I think about the perfect Google Analytics setup, I think of these levels. I think of the journey that the user has maybe already begun or wants to go, the path that he needs to take, the learning that he needs to have. And then I'll give him the right tool to get where he wants to go. Let's start at level 1. It's easy to make the first strides forward. You just get up on a bike and start pedaling forward. Think about the first time you have actually got onto a bike and were able to drive down the street. It opened so many new things. You were able to see new things, try out new things, and discovered this whole new world out there, which is digital analytics. So at the beginning, yes, you would need to get the handles. You would need to know how to not crash into something, but sometimes you crash probably. And third, you probably need to learn some street rules to not get driven over by a car or whatever. So there are some things you need to get used to. And it may take a longer time to get to where you want to go. But at some point, you want to switch and you want to go on to level 2. But for the beginning, the bike is actually pretty fine. So maybe consider not getting a car right away if you don't know how to drive on a bike first. Once you get to the level of a car, you say, okay, I want to invest money. I want to know how this works. But a car also, you need to take driver's lessons. So you need to how to drive in the traffic, depending on which country you live in. When I was in India, it's quite different driving than what we have here in Germany. You need to invest into your training. You need to figure out how a car works, what these little lights actually tell you once one light is blinking, what you should do. You might need to get outside help to actually drive it. But in the end, it will be worth it because you can go faster somewhere. You probably are more careful. You have limitations on the street because you are driving a car here and it's worth a lot. So you don't want to crash it into anything. But you can go so much faster. In Germany, we don't have a speed limit on our autobahns. You can go straight to the point, and it will get you definitely somewhere. At some point, you are not content with the streets anymore. You want to go further, faster, wider, better. And that's when you get to maybe, it's not a rocket ship. It's like a plane. A big plane, because you have a lot of people in the back sitting there, counting on you. And you're probably a lot of people more responsibility for than just in a car. So then you also have even more limitations. Think of it. A plane, you can't just fly around like this. You need to think about where you're going. And also you have the restrictions of landing it safely and so on. So not too much experimentation. You are more set on your way, but at the same time, it's the best way to get there fast. And that's what I also wanted to illustrate a little bit. It gets less agile once you get to level 3 here. So how would this actually look like in our Google Analytics implementation if we break it down again? When you just starting out, just building a bike or trying to get the right tool to actually get through the ropes, I think there are three basics that are important. First of all, tracking code. Second, clean recording of your data. And then also the sources and the goals. If you can get these 3 points right, then you are off to the races. What does that mean in detail? I'm not going to go through a Google Analytics implementation here with you, but just give you the checklist if we break it down to the checklist that we had before. So first of all, the tracking code. If you have a tracking code where we want our tracking to work correctly, we need to have it installed on all pages for Google Analytics, and we need to have a session continuity. So if it breaks somewhere, and this is something you need to check up regularly in your analytics to see where the session actually starts, landing page for example, and where it stops, does that actually make sense to you, and does it then work into the favor of Google Analytics? Because Google Analytics gives you a strong model, but you also need to feed that model the right data. And that's why tracking code installation is very important. It's most often that you see that only afterwards that you've done something wrong here, but look into it definitely at the beginning. How can I install the tracking code correctly? Google Tag Manager obviously helps you with this, but also be able to continue the session, to know what users are. The scope is very important. And one of the things that are a little bit more complicated to set up, I know, but nonetheless, if it's relevant to your business, you need to look at cross-domain tracking as well. Clean recording. Now, once the data comes into the account, we need to, or Google Analytics processes it for us. And that's a crucial step because we can't change the processing later on. We need to have some configurations down that make our data cleaner and more relevant. One is the 3 views that we have on 3 views, the unfiltered, the unfiltered test and master view. Referral exclusion, put your own domain on the referral exclusion. Spam bots, there are settings that you can tick. We will get into this later. And filters as well. So if you have any kind of host name filters, include or exclude any internal people who come to your website, just set this up at the beginning so you get cleaner data. You can always adjust later on, but still, this is something I would ask of you at the beginning when you set something up. And site search is also a feature that I would definitely look into. And then sources and goals. Now, once we get data in, data doesn't mean anything in Google Analytics unless you know where it's coming from. So how many people came actually to my website, and did they take the action that I intended them to take? So I would go through the exercise of setting up a measurement plan. This is something we talked about in a previous live training. I would look into, if you need goals or e-commerce tracking, how to track them. Maybe you are getting into event tracking there already, but it's not totally necessary. But just so you have a goal post and can log into your Google Analytics and see, okay, we got so many people from there, and did they actually convert, whatever that means for your website. Also, educate yourself a little bit about UTM tags, if that's, or your client about UTM tags, so they know how they can control how the traffic is classified in Google Analytics. Obviously, there will always be questions about attribution and what is the best way. But here, UTM tags are just important because this is how Google Analytics decides where your traffic is coming from. Direct traffic is something that is dead traffic, we can't really see. So something that you need to take care of. And last but not least, tool connection. If you have tools like the Search Console or Google AdWords, connect them to Google Analytics and have that prepared beforehand. Otherwise, you're missing out on data. Simply as that. These are the 3 basics that will get you already to maybe maturity model. You talk to the management, told them you are installing Google Analytics. This is the tool that we will use. You have like a request list, or you have a certain idea of like what you want to install in Google Analytics. Maybe the scope is pretty small at the beginning. You just report to yourself, and the resources are also very limited. It's just yourself. Maybe you're the consultant. There's just a small little project that you install for them. You have the right methodology with whatever you learned here now, and then you have this tool of Google Analytics. Just click tracking at the beginning will do. Then we go to level 2. And what is level 2? Where do I would say level 2 is at? Well, at level 2, you have a bigger car, and this is all about customization in Google Analytics. I would say a level 2 company has already the basics understanding of the data. They work with the data, and they just want to invest more into data and make it into something that is the company maybe data driven. Maybe they don't have that data advantage yet, but they want to datarize more and more departments. So they look into how can we get additional data from the tool, how can we get additional context, and externalize some of the tasks that we have inside of the tool. What would that look like? Additional data, obviously event tracking, then look into enhanced e-commerce tracking, although it's harder to set up. Invest into that first if you want to get to that second level. Phone tracking, there are probably different other tracking techniques out there that would benefit your business. Lead tracking, for example. Get more data on that, educate yourself. We can install custom metrics if that's something that is important in your business. Additional context, that's when you really want to get into custom dimensions. What extra data can I get from the form fields that are submitted, or what extra data do we get from certain pages? Where can we push in more information into the data layer and transfer this onto Google Analytics? That's where you also would get into content groups and channel grouping. So you view the data differently. And last but not least, you want to externalize a little bit of the work. So you probably at that stage already are turning away from Google Analytics as an analysis tool and actually look at exporting that data into a Google Sheet, into R, into Python, to somebody, so somebody can take that data and actually wrangle it and get insights out of it. Maybe you even have a dedicated person at that time already that actually is a web analyst and looks at that data and tries to figure it out. And also the presentation part will become more important because you want to convince people with that data, and that's when you get into other tools like Data Studio or Tableau. You get into dashboarding, but also making sure reports get to the right people at the right time. So at that time, you are already expanding your circle. Maybe you're not quite fit on all the stages quite yet, but it's something that you can improve upon. And you're probably already at a at a stage where probably, I would say 80% of the businesses are not at yet with Google Analytics and with your tool. So your tool is getting better and better, but as you expand those, you also want to expand on the other ends of your spectrum of the digital analytics maturity in order to make this all work. And then the level 3, the plane, the luxury bus that is getting you there faster. How would that look like? And it's really about personalization. So taking your implementation and making it your own. Maybe even throwing away the model that we have in Google Analytics and coming up with your own model. Combining data from different data sources, modeling your data, making your own model of your data is something that you need to take into your own hands, and then also distribute that data out. Make it really a habit of getting the right data to the right people, coming up with solutions with your data, and making this all work. How does that look like in terms of Google Analytics? Combining data, obviously we can get first-party data on our website and integrate that into the tool. Like, for example, we are sending the client ID into our CRM system, so we will be able to connect data later on. The user came onto the website, did this and this and this, and then he converted, and now we know more about our customer. So we're connecting data together. Third-party information could also be useful. Google Analytics gives us some, but putting our data, our web analytics data, into the broader spectrum of what does our industry look like is something that might be of interest at that stage, if you also have the people to actually analyze it, right? And then thinking about data warehousing. So a lot of people at that stage already turn away from Google Analytics as a whole, as a tracking tool. But if you keep Google Analytics, maybe think about how you can export that data, maybe use something like BigQuery to take that data out and then connect it to other tools and put it into a broader data warehouse that actually houses all your data and is accessible to that. Then we can model our data. Once we have it out of there, we can take something like BigQuery and come up with our own session definition. We can tear up the definition of hit, session, and scope and put it together maybe into a framework that suits our business more. That's when we get into a own definition of web analytics, not the definition of Google Analytics anymore, and make it truly our own. And then distribution, what will become more and more important is to take our analytics data, put it into a bigger context, but also starting to explore that data for decision making and change in the company. So having a process to actually take that data, make it accessible to anybody, and then also pushing for change through the data is something that you will do at that stage, and most of the time will always be spent there. So that's something, when you have the right team in place, where it can make a big impact. So your perfect Google Analytics setup goes from the bike over to the car, over to the jet plane, and maybe you can build a rocket ship, but probably not with Google Analytics. It's just this one tool. All right, the maturity model would obviously expand out at that stage as well. And not yet perfect. I think that when you look at Google Analytics, it's only perfect to a certain degree. You will never reach something where you say, oh, I can track everything with Google Analytics. It's perfect for me at this stage. There's always more that you can track, but you can't get that data with Google Analytics and how it's actually working. So the takeaway, I hope, what would you take away from this is that, first of all, there is no perfect Google Analytics setup. There's just a perfect Google Analytics setup for you, for the right stage, for the right business, for all the circumstances that you need to take into consideration. Important, these circumstances can be taken into consideration. You need to take the full scope of your implementation. This will help you definitely when you think about client calls and think about the business where you're installing this. How does that actually make sense? And then you will build something that lasts, right? That is not just a Google Analytics that you set up. And the worst part is really when people say, hey, we just start new. Okay, my Google Home in the background just set off. So again, you need to think about the implementation with all the considerations that you can take into account. And then you can start and leveling up slowly. So which level are you on right now? I don't know, but maybe consider starting with the bike if you don't have the capacity of taking all these things into consideration. Build a bike first before you go to the jet plane. And every time something new comes up in Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, you look at my videos, you think, oh, this is a cool technique, this is so cool, new feature in Google Analytics, how can I use this, let's enable this. Ask yourself, does this actually help my implementation, right? Not every implementation is actually for you. It's maybe built for some other use case, and it won't make that big impact because you can't use that data. It's not that relevant data. You don't get that clean data. So really always think about saying no to implementations as well. So I hope this helped you out. And right now I'm going to take some Q&A questions. We had some already. I'm just going to scroll down and see if everything is all right in the chat. Yes, Koen also joined us, so welcome, Koen. Take a sip of my coffee. Again, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'm in the chat. Let's go on, and let me just go to the full camera again. See, okay, everything is okay. Then let's continue with our, what time is it? Okay, half an hour. That sounds good. Let's go into our Q&A section. And this is where we're gonna get into a little bit of a demo. So Vincent asked, okay, let's go down here. Vincent asked, can you dive into cleaning up direct traffic? What to do if you have a high percentage of direct traffic? How to get some of that better categorized? And then he has a second question, which I'm gonna answer in a second. So first of all, direct traffic. Direct traffic is dark traffic. You can't really do anything with it because you don't know where the user came from. How does Google Analytics actually determine direct traffic? If you go over to Google Analytics and we go into the acquisition reports and here source medium, you sometimes see a lot of direct traffic, which is unfortunate. But we need to also talk about how does Google Analytics actually determine direct traffic. A lot of people think that direct traffic is just somebody typing this into their account and landing on a website. But direct traffic can actually be much more. Why? You need to think about how Google Analytics acts or the tracking code acts. First of all, what it will do when the user lands on the website, it will look onto the URL and see if there are, let me see if I have the demo shop open right now. No, demoshop.measureschool.com. So once the user comes onto the website, Google Analytics, and I don't have Google Analytics installed here right now, but Google Analytics will simply look into the URL up here, and if there are UTM parameters, like this, it will look into the UTM parameters and decide on the source and the medium and the campaign. That's when your Google Analytics will not put your traffic into direct none. Second, if the referrer is defined. So if you go from google.com to Measure School, okay, now I'm going. What Google Analytics will do is will look into JavaScript and say what was the document dot referrer, and it will see google.com, and therefore The user came from Google, and we're going to put him into the into the Google Organic column or a row here, right? Google Organic row. So the referrer is the second thing I look for. And other than that, they can't really do much more. So when a user comes from a website and the user is not identifiable in any sense through a UTM parameter or through the document referrer, he will go into direct none, which is fine. But at the same time, there are lots of people who come to the website where Google Analytics cannot identify the referrer. Example being email. If you open up an email in Outlook and click on a link inside of the email, you are not actually coming from another website. You're coming from another program, Outlook, and Google Analytics wouldn't be able to identify where the user just came from. And that's why it will be going into direct none. Unfortunately, if you don't have UTM tags installed, you will get a lot of direct traffic. First reason, simple reason. So what you can do if you want to get rid of direct traffic is actually look into your Google Analytics records here, click on direct, and first of all, choose the secondary dimension, which is landing page. So where did the traffic that actually came to our page direct, where did they land? This may, I don't know why it takes so long, this may give you a hint at where you might have linked up this link and where you could change the link around to attach UTM parameters. So you could go in and say, okay, oh yeah, I sent out a newsletter last week that linked up to Google redesign /new. And that's why 53 people came from that link, and they are now in the direct column, but I know where they came from. They came from newsletter. It's hard to recategorize them right now inside of Google Analytics. But if you are expecting to have more people coming through that link, then maybe consider either changing a link in the email if you can, or on that website that you have running. Or there is an implementation that you can do within Google Tag Manager to actually say, okay, everybody who comes from that landing page, I want to recategorize them into this source medium and not put them into direct none. Simple as that. Everybody who comes to this link will have a special UTM parameter that I can build into Google Tag Manager. We have a tutorial on this inside of Measure Masters. Let me know if you are interested in figuring this out. I can send this over to you. So this is one of your questions. This is how you could mitigate a little bit of the direct none. The other part why direct none sometimes happens is simply the session is broken. So if you find yourself with a lot of direct nones, over 30% of your traffic, try to look into where's the landing page, because the landing page oftentimes hints at where the session started. And if you find a page where you just can't possibly see any user going there by accident or by a link, for example, a checkout page or so, then it might hint at that your session is actually broken. The user comes to a certain point in their user journey. They go on to an iframe or something, and suddenly they get a new client ID, and that's why the session is broken. Google Analytics actually starts a new session, and then suddenly people come through direct. And that's just simply the tracking code is broken, and that can be one reason why you have a lot of directs. There could be more reasons, but these are the big two that I could think of right now, and some ways to mitigate the UTM loss as well. So look into this too. I hope this answers your question. And the second question here is an update on cleaning incoming data, like what to do with spam bots, etc. What are current best practices to cleaning incoming data besides the delete known bots and spam option? So first of all, deletes known bots and spam option. This is this option that he's talking about here in the view settings. Exclude all hits from known bots and spiders. And what are the other spam options that you have? So a few years ago, now it's a few years ago, there was a big uprising of people who saw that their referrers here under all traffic referrals actually got spammed by a lot of different companies that are actually not real referrers, which mainly happened through the measurement protocol. So the user or the bot didn't actually come to your page through a spam link, but they may have just sent that data to your account through the API, which is the measurement protocol. I can't find any right here. Maybe they have filtered them out. But again, this is something you want to filter out. There are several methods of actually going into and deleting any kind of spam. Unfortunately, it's a more retroactive, more, once you see the spam, you want to get rid of it kind of thing, because it actually, can destroy your account. So what spam people have started doing lately is, I think, the language referrers. Sometimes those are spammed right here. Don't see any ones yet. Let me go over to one of my demo accounts. No, sometimes you see here some languages. So they just spam. The funny thing is, like, where actually is this report? See, I don't know. Some reports I never look at. So I don't know where they're located. Under Geo. Okay, that makes sense. Huh. Who would have thought that I cannot come up with an example here? No, these are all... I don't know what ID... Okay, ID. That's a pretty... Let me just Google this. So sometimes you don't know. Is that, no, it's probably not an actual referrer. So ID, probably this is spam, right? So how did it get there? You can just make a measurement protocol hit, and then it will be in the account, and you just set the referrer, the language dimension to ID. So we can also, average session duration is pretty high though. Maybe somebody can shed light on the ID, if this is an actual country. ID, country code. Is it India? Oh yeah, it's probably India. Okay. So there are a lot of people from India, so it's not spam. But anyways, there are a lot of dimensions that they could spam and try to figure out. So there are some precautions that you can take, and you can get down to the nitty-gritty of this, like with any Google Tag Manager, any Google Analytics implementation, to actually get rid of the spam once you identified it. There are, first of all, filter options in Google Analytics. These are great depending on what you want to filter, you can install certain filters and say, I only want to filter people who come have the language dimension of this and that. Then one filter that might be interesting to set up is to actually look at the host name filter. So if there's a host name that is not set, for example, then I want to filter those out. Anytime somebody comes up and has like a host name that is not your host name, so if you send over a page view request from your site, then obviously your host name is in there, then you could filter those people out. Some spammers have become more sophisticated. They actually visit your website, they find out the host name, and they can still spam you. So everything is kind of spookable. The other thing that I figured out that, or many people figured out, is that actually if you have a property ID, so what these scammers obviously do is they just randomize a Google Analytics tracking ID, they randomize it, and they just change around these numbers and send off these requests. You can do this in a big fashion if you have some kind of automation running. And they always, most of the Google Analytics accounts have a number 1 here in the back. Now you get a number 2, 3, 4, 5 if you just open up a new property. So this is maybe a distraction for the spammers, and they don't really use 2, 3, and 4. Obviously, this is also easily scammable if they just figure out, okay, a higher number, we're just going to use them. But maybe if you set up a completely new account, open up multiple properties and just use the 3rd or 4th property in order to make it your main account. This will help with this spamming. There are multiple filters, spam filters. I can link you up to several of those. Yeah, I would always say, in my opinion, I look at an account and say, oh, wow, there's a lot of spam in here and we can't do a certain analysis, right? Let's take care of the spam problem. But in terms of best practices, you can obviously use hostname filters. You can look into the spam bot option. You can look at properties, but it's not something that I would always do. And it's definitely just something that bothers only people who really look into it in detail, right? Obviously, you don't want to inflate your hit count and so on. But there's just the thing that was in vogue under the spammers 2 years ago. I can't really find a spammer right here. Let me just look into again into the referrals, because the referrals were always so much spammed just 2 years ago, and they probably figured out that 5-6 years ago that it's just too many. Or it just doesn't give you any return, so they just stopped it. I think, I don't know if these are all spams or not. Anyways, in that sense, you would need to look into this and see where are these people coming from. You can also look at your host name and technology. We have our, I think, browser and OS. No, on the network. We have our hostname report, and this is where most of the data is coming from. So here I have many different host names that are actually not my website, and therefore I could just exclude them from my account, right? Could also happen that somebody takes, like in this implementation, if you do a lot of YouTube videos where you give out templates for Google Tag Manager, and you forget to change the Google Analytics ID, which I've done on this demo shop, then people take that and install it onto a website and never change the Google Analytics ID. And suddenly I have 15,000 visits from this domain that I've never installed Google Analytics on, but they're sending data to my account. So you can filter that out and try to make it as clean as possible. But again, you can get really, really sophisticated. I have a video on, you could even do this on a tracking side, right? You can install certain techniques in Google Tag Manager to only pick up those that are actually logged into your website. If that's something that's relevant to you, then do it. But again, it always depends on how much time and effort you want to put in there. And I wouldn't say as a best practice there is like the standard thing that I would always follow in order to make this work, because I think these things change and we also need to look into the account and fix it on that end. So I hope that helps, Vincent. Then we had a question from Matthew: how to keep content page URL in G8 neat and clean, remove all unrelated query parameters and combine them and duplicate pages. So what does he mean by that? If you ever do any analysis in your behavior, in your content reports, or pages reports, you might know that Google Analytics most of the times just gives you the page path, but sometimes they give you a query parameter, and this is everything after the actual question mark, which might provide some knowledge. In the actual case of here, we would know SC is maybe source, handphone. It may also be some category, so SC, I don't know what it stands for. So it gives us a little bit of context, but at the same time, it doesn't show the user something differently, right? So if I would take this handphone tablet thing and put it in here, we see that all of these are actually one page, but they're all split up here in Google Analytics because always this query parameter in the end is always different. Page number 2, so the user looked at the number 2, which is something that I would track separately, so I wouldn't filter this out because it's actually a different page that the user bought, and it would give me insights about that how many users went actually page 2, right, of that category. But then if I look at this and this and this one, it's the basic same page. Now I clicked on something. It's the basic same page, but the results are split up just because there's a different parameter on them. And the user would see the same, and so I would like to analyze all these pages the same, right? So this is actually misleading because we actually need to count this one, and this one on top of it, and actually combine all of this data. So Google Analytics splits by page path, but unfortunately also takes into consideration these different parameters. So you would need to get rid of these parameters and combine them into one. How would you be able to do this? There are different methods. Again, you could do it on the measurement side on Google Tag Manager. I would say that this is something that is viable if you can do it fast and you know your ways around Google Tag Manager. There's a custom task by Simo that you could install, and which actually takes out any kind of personal identifiable information. Very important to actually take that out so I don't see your email address in this URL. Sometimes that's the case when something is submitted. So you could filter those out, but it makes it a little bit harder because you need to mess with your tracking actually. Google Analytics itself has a setting that you can do it on the processing side. So every time data comes in, you want to filter it out, you can build a filter that, you can go into your view settings here, and there's a setting called, where's the strip parameters? Here, exclude URL query parameters, right? So every time MID or Vmail is shown, or what did we have, SC, then just take it out of your analytics account or of your page path. And this is what this settings field does. So just go through all of them that you see in your account and put them into the exclude URL query parameter. That would be the easiest. Now that won't save you if you, or it is something that you would need to do individually, and obviously you would need to look into your reports beforehand. So what else can you do? You can build a filter. And I don't know the exact settings for the filter, but again, something I'm gonna link up down below. The cool thing about filters is that you can copy them from one account to the next. So if you set up a new Google Analytics account, you might want to take that into consideration if you want to exclude certain parameters on Shopify, for example. So something to include. One other thing that I wanted to mention here that came to mind with your question is, how can I keep it clean and organized? If the URL doesn't really tell you anything about the page, so some old CMS systems have like page path 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and some random number, and it shows a category of some product. You can actually rename this page dimension in Google Tag Manager. So before you send this over to Google Tag Manager, and this is actually something people do simply for the reason that the people who are looking at Google Analytics are not the people who are the website masters, right? They don't actually always know where which category is at. So they want to recategorize how it is actually viewed, and they want to put in certain variables into this page path. So what they do is actually build a data layer, complete data layer over the website, where every time there's a data or a new page view, they push in the category, the product name, and the original page path. And then they rewrite the page path inside of Google Tag Manager before they send it onto Google Analytics with a coherent structure of /category /product name in order for the product team to be actually able to identify this thing. So I hope that makes sense, and this was some of the thoughts that I had on the query parameter. And then he says, remove all and combine them in duplicate pages. I thought Matthew had another question about, maybe I didn't copy this, about how to utilize the, let me just go over to our Facebook page here. Where's I just need to scroll down. Matthew, if you're in the chat, you can also just write us. Hold on, where was my, here. Oh yeah, I missed the question here. How to set up perfect channel for detail reporting. Yeah, I would say that if you look at channels in Google Analytics, so how do you set up channels? You have the ability here to do source medium tracking, obviously, but then we also have channels, and channels are a more simplified reporting structure because yeah, you always had this referral thing, which was social traffic, and everything was mixed together. So Google Analytics wanted to give us a easier way to actually take the traffic that we see here in our source medium report and then put them into the right channel. And this is what you can configure in your admin section here under your custom channel settings. So you can build custom channel groupings. And these default channel groupings are affiliate and so on. Google Analytics, again, makes their own rules. But if you say, hey, I have a very important channel, which is my, I don't know, coupon channel, you can start putting in your own channel grouping and doing this defined on custom dimensions that you have available. It's not actually something that you could put into the tracking code, I guess. So again, here, or brand terms, also something that is something that's very important. The question is, how detailed do you want to get, right? If you want to, I would always work off, what do I actually want to optimize? Do I want to optimize the actual ad text that I have on my banners? Then that's something you would need to track. Do I want to know when the user stops watching a video? Again, that's something you need to track, and that's something you would need to put into somehow into your channel grouping. There is no best practice here of how to, or I would say there's no best practice for me of how I built the channel grouping. I actually don't use channel grouping too often because I'm more a fan of the source medium tracking still. This is just from my understanding. This is the raw data going in, and then I start building up the channels. And in the end, channel grouping is just another classification, another bucket that you can put your traffic into and present it to your client, to the web analyst, or to the parties that would work with the data. So really think about who is working with the data, what is easiest for them. If there is a social media manager, he probably wants to know which post did best. And so you would need to build that into tracking, probably on UTM parameters, and then later into your channel grouping. So you will be able to put this all into one channel. You can obviously filter here and say, okay, I have I have an add text. So you would say here add content or add format, whatever dimension you push this into. And if that is contained here in my field, I want to put it into this bucket. Just think of it as bucket. And it really depends on who are you presenting this to. And work off that. Now, Google Analytics, in my opinion, is not the best tool to give just to a social media manager and tell him, here, I have configured it correctly. You probably need to do some kind of reporting for him. And this is when you anyways go outside of the tool and build a dashboard in Google Data Studio. And this is where you can also utilize the abilities of Google Data Studio to combine traffic, to put it into the right bucket. Depends on the user who's working the data. So no clear explanation for me here. I hope this helps to with your thoughts. All right, this is it. If you have any more questions, I'm going to go into the chat and see who we have here. Vincent is also here. Good information. Thanks for using. ID Indonesia. Yes, probably Indonesia. Sorry. Michelle is also here. How do you set up cross-domain tracking? Good question. Cross-domain tracking is a bit harder to set up, just simply because it also depends on the case where you need cross-domain tracking. Two things that I want to mention before we get started, or not started, before I dive into cross-domain tracking and how to set it up. Do you actually need cross-domain tracking? If you have a website where you have one Google Analytics code installed and a second website where you have a Google Analytics code installed, a completely separate one, do you need cross-domain tracking? No, because you have two separate Google Analytics accounts and they record two separate data sets. If you want to combine these data sets and have only one Google Analytics account, which is installed on both websites, you might need Google Analytics cross-domain tracking. But again, you need to look at two things. Do you have two separate domains? So is it website 123.com as opposed to, or this, and then the second website is website 235.com? Then you have two separate domains and you want to connect them into one Google Analytics account. But if you have this is where you need cross-domain tracking. If you have a subdomain, you don't need cross-domain tracking. Google Analytics does this actually by default. Okay, now if you have two Google Analytics settings, two Google Analytics, you have one Google Analytics and two website domains where you want to set it up, then I would look into the, you need to change the tracking code. You can change the tracking code either in Google Tag Manager or in Google Analytics. We have tutorials out there and also in the membership, so I don't want to bother, I don't want to show it again, but this goes into more depth and it is really dependent on what kind of website do you have. The thing that is important, and this is something maybe I can show you on Measure School. The thing that is important to check whether cross-domain tracking works is if you click a link to another domain. In our case, it would be, I don't know what's going down here. In our case, it would be our measure.school. Do you actually then have a tail of underscore GA on there. And this is what transfers the session over. And this is where you would have cross-domain tracking. So I have cross-domain tracking installed here, but if it's not working, there's no cross-domain tracking happening if there's no tail in the back here of the URL. And this is a little bit of tracking implementation, which actually looks at all the links on the website and finds out, okay, which one goes to measure.school, and therefore I will, when the user clicks this button, redirect him or put a query string on the back here of the URL. So if I go here and inspect this element, we see that it was automatically attached to the link. This is transferring the settings, and how to implement this. I will link up a tutorial. I hope this helps, Mikael. Then we have Vincent. Second question, I came across a site with privacy option. When you enter, there's no tracking. If you select OK, so accepting tracking, it turns on GA. Then that would be a direct visitor too. Interesting. Would that be a direct visitor? Presumably, the tracking that you came across would only... Okay, let me think about this. The right way to do this, and I had a video on my channel about this, is, and we also had a live training, I think, about this, is to utilize an option in Google Analytics, which is the, I don't know the exact parameter, but it's like the add option, something in Google Tag Manager. So you need to put it into the tracking code. And what the tracking code does is, if the user comes to the website and he has a referrer, the page you get sent. Only if the user then clicks on the privacy notice and says, yes, I agree, then you send off add data, because the privacy data and this whole GDPR thing is mostly centered around data that gathers data that you give them consent to. Anonymous data that you send to Google Analytics is fine. So the tracking code option with the add allow something feature gives you the ability to get Google Analytics information, normal page view information that's not illegal or anywhere privacy concern, but then connecting it back to AdWords data and so on is a concern, and that's where you get consent for. So the right way to do this is to build in such a tracking, a two-tier tracking that would ask the user, when the user comes onto the website, track the page view and send on the referral and the direct or whatever, and then pops up the message, do you agree? If you say yes, then it sends another beacon to Google Analytics and say, okay, it's fine to connect that data to AdWords, for example. So that's the right way to do it. Now, when I see the option that you described, I would say, even if the page view is sent later, so the user clicks and then the page view is sent, Google Analytics still would put in that function document referrer and would see, he came from Google. I would say no, it wouldn't impact the referrer, or it wouldn't impact the classification in your channel reporting if it's set up correctly. So I hope that answers that question. And that's it. No more questions here. Oh, yes, I forgot. Mikael said, the situation that you will use Piwik over analytics. Piwik, it's like a new thing. It's called differently now, right? Monomoto or something. Or Piwik. Matomo. Would I use Matomo over something? Depends on the client. Depends on if the European Commission uses it. Okay, what data do you want to get? You just need to think about what kind of data processing is happening in Google Analytics, and therefore I think that Google Analytics is just also comparable to other Google Analytics installations. So how many page views do you have and so on. It's really hard to compare to something else. If you have a Matomo implementation and it works for you, then I would consider it if it's right for the client. I'm not too deep into Matomo, so I don't know if it's like so much better. Obviously, there are these privacy concerns. So if there's a user who says, I need to have the governance of my own data, I need to have it on my own server, use Matomo. Google Analytics sends the data to servers in the US and it gets processed there. Therefore, this is the biggest difference I can see between the tools. You could also use something like Snowplow. Think about that. But yeah, every tool has their advantages, and that's when I would look at Matomo as an alternative to Google Analytics. Hope that answers your question. Did I miss anything? Oh, Dilma asks, how can I minimize the effects? Sorry, I will go back here. We have a chat actually. Oh, it doesn't load our chat. Okay. Then I didn't test this correctly. Let me just see here what Dilma wrote earlier. Sorry, I didn't catch the question at the first time. How can I minimize the effects of using multiple accounts for a single site due GA hit limit? Use multiple accounts for a single site. Okay, GA hit limit. First of all, GA hit limit is also only something that is existing in the free version. You can get rid of it by upgrading, which costs a lot of money. Second is you can put something like a sample rate in there. So hits are everything that are sent to Google Analytics. So if you are sending another hit, for example, site speed sample, that's something you should set lower, because it or higher, yeah, a higher sample threshold. The second thing, there are different tricks to send less events. Then you could also look into the page. Simo has a custom task to actually look at the sample hits that were sent, the hit size, and get it down. And then obviously come up with workarounds of how to send less data. It really depends on your case. Unfortunately, it's my standard answer, but it's really hard to come up with. It really depends on, you need to be very creative there and look at the problem in that sense, that it's not something that is solvable just by a few clicks. Yeah, it depends on your case, and definitely you can find a workaround here, or look at another tool to actually make it work. I hope that helps. Tanya says, one more question. My client is changing websites from independent local website to one main website, similar to bodyshop.com. Okay. In terms of setting up GA on such a website, would you have a single GA account and filters views on country level? Depending on, so if it's a large corporate website, depending on the usage. So if you have a whole team sitting in different countries with different responsibilities, permissions, and so on, and different people looking at the data, then I would probably set up multiple accounts for multiple companies or countries, and also set up one single account, and this is called then roll-up tracking. So you take all the data from the different accounts and put it into one account, so they have that available. I would also set up views. That is, I would, yeah, obviously set up views, but if you go the view route, you could also do that. If these are smaller in scope, right? If they don't need the full flexibility in controlling what they want to do inside of their view. So for example, put in filters and so on. So that's what I would recommend. If it's a bigger company, definitely think about roll-up tracking. If it's a smaller operation and there's one central team, then I would just stick with views. That's the easier to set up and doesn't confuse everybody with multiple implementations of Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics. Hope that helps. All right. Markets act independently. Yeah, then you're already at the point where I guess let's say you have a different marketing manager for Spain, and the marketing manager then would say, okay, I want to know all the tracking that came through on my website with these different products, and I may also want to use my own channel grouping or change around some of the specifics. The other thing that you think about is time zone. Google Analytics cuts off certain time zones. And if you want to find out what is the perfect time to do this coupon action or whatever, it's something tricky that if the property would probably restrict you in that sense to actually find out the time. It's inconvenience because then you would always need to calculate, okay, our main GA account is in that time zone and how many hours is that, but also for the session time, time zone restriction actually gives you the problem that a session might be cut off at midnight. So a session starts new at midnight, and therefore can be really hard to figure out data or see data inconsistencies. Cool. I hope that answers your question. If there are no more questions, then I would like to wrap this up. Thank you very much again for sticking around at I will go back to the implementation. Every links and everything I will link up down below. Thank you again for being part of this Measure Master live training, coming on live and asking questions. And I'm going to see you hopefully inside of the community, inside of the comments, and around. As always, where do I have it? As always, my name is Julian. Till next time.